Hey there, it's Board Game Dave. Today we're taking a look at a phenomenal family game, the fourth most played game in my collection, and a game that was once ranked number 22 overall on Board Game Geek, and a game that literally changed my life. It's not an exaggeration to say that I would not be the board gamer that I am without this game. And that game is Stone Age. Stone Age is a 2 to 4 player worker placement game set in the Neolithic age, when our ancestors were starting to leave their hunter-gatherer ways and developing agriculture, settling into more permanent shelters, and constructing better tools. In this game, you are the leader of a fledgling tribe, sending out a small workforce to gather resources and food, craft new tools, cultivate more fertile fields, and build more sturdy structures in an attempt to feed your tribe, advance your civilization, and grow your population. The player who does this most effectively, as represented by victory points, wins. But let's back up for a minute. How did this seemingly unassuming game change my life? Well, growing up, my family played the typical games of the time: Stratego, Sorry, Trouble, Monopoly, those sorts of games. Us kids also played a lot of Age of Empires 1 and 2 on the family PC, and we were obsessed, but I'll get back to that later. In high school and in college, I was introduced to Settlers of Catan and then later Dominion. These were both games that I enjoyed a lot, but I was particularly drawn to Dominion. This game was a big hit in my friend group, and we used to break it out every so often, eventually adding some of the early expansions. At some point in my 20s, that same game group somehow stumbled upon and got a hold of a game called Scythe, a brilliant strategy game full of combat, chance encounters, mechs, resources, and a whole lot of rules. None of us had ever really played a game anywhere near this complex before, and for a long time we played the game without a firm grasp of the rules. I remember really enjoying Scythe every time I played, but it still didn't spark the love for board games that I have now. That would come later. Somehow we also dabbled in a bit of Terra Mystica, but we didn't end up playing that game too much, and it was a little overwhelming for me in complexity at the time. So it's December 2018 and school's out for about a week or so. During this time, I decided that I wanted to create my own board game. I mean, how hard could it be? In my mind, the grand vision was to make Age of Empires the board game. You'd start as one of a handful of civilizations in your own corner of the map, gather resources, explore the map around you, gradually grow your population, build farms and mines and barracks, create an army, then eventually wage war with the other players. It seemed like a no-brainer, and after about 45 hours of brainstorming, cutting and crafting, playtesting, and rule writing, I had a functioning prototype for a game that I was calling Ancient Empires. I showed it to my friends and got it to the table whenever I got a chance, and I kept tweaking and revising the game. At some point, I posted a picture of my game to social media, and an old co-worker named Mark, who I hadn't known was into board games, seemed interested and suggested that we get together for a game night. When Mark came over, he brought with him a duffel bag full of games that he wanted to show me, and I had never seen or heard of any of these games. I was amazed at how many games he knew about, which were totally unfamiliar to me. He suggested that I go check out a game store in New Holland called 6 Feet Under Games, and within a few weeks I would have my first board game store experience. Now, keep in mind that, at the time, I was under the impression that my economic civilization building game was going to be groundbreakingly innovative and would blow people's minds. This delusion was shattered after about 7 seconds of being in that store when I gazed up at the hundreds and hundreds of titles, all categorized as economic and civilization building games. I probably spent over an hour at 6 Feet Under that day, looking at all the different game boxes, taking tons of pictures of their covers, looking up particularly interesting games online, and wondering about what these games might be like. One game that looked especially promising was Stone Age, as it seemed to incorporate some of my favorite parts of Age of Empires: the resource gathering and building. Feeling a bit overwhelmed with a world of new possibilities, I left the store that day with a game called Cat Lady, but within about a month, I went back to buy Stone Age. I was instantly obsessed with the game and played with anyone who I could convince to try it. Everything about the game just clicked with me, and I immediately knew that I wanted to play more games just like it. It wasn't long until I had added games like Lewis and Clark, Raiders of the North Sea, and Architects of the West Kingdom to my collection. I was obsessed with worker placement games, but very quickly I got into other games like Western Legends, Azul, Seven Wonders, and Wingspan. By the end of 2019, I had bought 24 games, and the obsession had officially begun. And that's how I got into this wild and wonderful hobby of board games. By now, it should be clear that Stone Age will forever hold a special place on my shelves as the game that got me into this hobby. It's also special to me because it was one of the first games that Hannah and I ever played together, and I still think it's her favorite game of all the games that we've played together so far. All this to say, it's difficult for me to look objectively at this game for a review, but I'll do my absolute best, and you'll just have to keep in mind the sentimental value that I've attached to this game and take my ratings with maybe a grain of salt. First of all, let's start with the art and components. I personally really love the art by Michael Menzel. I think that the style goes really well with this theme, and the components are great. You've got these wooden resources, wooden meeples, 7 wooden dice. It's really, really great. And the dice get rolled in this wonderful faux leather cup, which there's this whole thing about this stinky cup fiasco. I don't know what people are talking about. I think my dice cup is fantastic. I have no complaints with it. You guys are all crazy. I give the art and the components and the aroma of the dice cup a 9 out of 10. Second, complexity and audience. I think this game is the perfect complexity for the intended audience. If you've played several games, especially games like Catan, this game is right in the perfect weight for you. It has a lot of familiar elements, but it also introduces worker placement and set collection, and it also works as a perfect stepping stone toward more heavy, complex games that still use those same mechanisms. I give the complexity a 10 out of 10 here. Third, thematic integration. I think this game is very thematic. Let's say that you want to get some wood. So you put 4 of your guys out into the forest, and then you get to roll 4 dice, and that determines how much wood you bring back from the forest. I love that you roll 1 die for each worker because you can kind of anticipate getting a lot of resources, but there's still that randomness there, which kind of matches with the uncertainty of living in these times. And if you don't like the dice rolling, you can mitigate that with tools, right? So if you spend one of your workers to develop some tools that can help you mitigate the dice rolls and kind of bump it up by 1 pip each, so even that's thematic. Using tools to help you get more resources, that's awesome. I give the thematic integration a 9 out of 10. Fourth, intuitive mechanics. I think that this game is extremely intuitive, and even though it's a bit of a complex game, it's really easy to teach because everything is logical. Take the agriculture, for example, okay? At the end of each round, you have to pay food for your tribespeople, right? 1 food per tribesperson. But if you invest in the agriculture, right, developing those fields, for each step that you've gone up that track, you can pay 1 less food during that phase, right? Which makes sense. Instead of needing to hunt for all your food, the fields are doing some of that work. It's intuitive, it clicks, and it just makes sense. I give the intuitive mechanics a 10 out of 10. Fifth, replayability. Now, the game struggles a bit here. This game is 14 years old. This is before, variable player powers and modular maps and stuff like that. So there's no real setup variation, but that's not to say that this game isn't replayable. I've played it many, many, many times, and each time there's different paths to explore and different strategies to try, and it's certainly replayable, but there isn't much replayability baked into the setup of the game, so I'll give it a 7 out of 10 here. Sixth, length and fun factor. Now, my plays of Stone Age are not usually very long. In fact, they typically last exactly between 60 to 90 minutes, just like it says on the box. So, not very long, and it's fun all the way through the game. I should mention that there's a kind of a game timer going on, either when the deck of cards runs out or when 1 stack of buildings runs out, the game is over. So you can sort of see when the game's ramping up toward the end and it gets a little bit more intense, that urgency is there as the game goes on. So the game is really, really fun all the way throughout. You start kind of small, but then your engine starts building, you're getting more resources, you're doing more stuff, and then right at the right time, the game ends and you count up points. I love that. Great length, fun all the way through. I give it a 9.5 out of 10. And finally, the cost versus value. Now, unfortunately, this game is hard to find right now, but the MSRP is $50. I got it for around $42. So it's a little bit pricey for the components inside the box, but it is such a phenomenal game. It is such a joy to play. I highly, highly recommend it, and I think that it's a great value for your money. I'll give it a 9 out of 10 here. And that gives us a final average score of 9 out of 10 for Stone Age, which I think is perfectly appropriate and objective. Like I said, this game has played a huge role in my life, and it was a big part in connecting me with other board gamers and meeting a ton of new friends, and even fostering a love of board games in Hannah as well. It's considered a modern classic for a reason, and I highly recommend you give it a try if you get a chance. Although I always prefer and suggest playing the physical version of the game, it is available on Board Game Arena, so you can test it out and see if you like it over there. Go check out Stone Age if you get a chance, and in the meantime, have a wonderful week, take care, and happy gaming. Bye!